And a very good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101. David Hines here with you this evening on a Thursday as we come to the program with the news that the Apex Court, the CCJ, has thrown out the petition or the appeal, thrown out the petition by the APNU AFC, as you know. The Chief Justice had thrown out the petition on technical grounds of late service, and the matter was appealed to our appeal court, the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal had to first determine whether it had jurisdiction to hear such an appeal, and it ruled that it did. And the PPP, of course, appealed that ruling, and the appeal court, meaning the Apex Court, the CCJ, has today ruled that the Court of Appeal has no jurisdiction to hear the matter. So that's a big development there. What it means, therefore, is for all intents and purposes, that petition has been thrown out. It's dead as far as the courts are concerned. The second big development was the Attorney General posting the decision on his Facebook before the court announced it. The court, of course, would have passed on to the lawyers on both sides the decision beforehand. Apparently, this is a practice of the courts. And Nandlal posted the decision on his Facebook page last evening. The court apparently was very offended, reprimanded him, and demanded an apology. That's the big stories as we come in to our program this evening. Of course, this evening, we are going to be talking with Rickford Burke, who, as you know, has been relentlessly pursued by this government. They've tried everything in the book, and the latest was to get Mr. Burke involved in a case there in Guyana, putting out a bulletin, wanted bulletin for him to be questioned, and all of that. All of that, as you know, because most of you have been following the story. So Mr. Burke is here to speak to that matter tonight. So please, of course, share the link and let everyone know that Politics 101 is on. Good evening to all of you, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining from Guyana, from our wider Caribbean, whether you're coming at us and coming to us from North America or Europe or South America, of course, our brothers and sisters there in Suriname and French Guyana and Venezuela and Brazil. Welcome to Politics 101. A good, special good evening to the people of Bedford Wacton. Last night we had a big discussion here on what's happening in BV with the land sale. This morning I was on Bostonian Morning Time continuing that discussion. It's a very important discussion because it brings to bear on the larger discourse. What are the powers of the democratic councils, the regional democratic councils, the neighborhood democratic councils, and this issue of ancestral lands, this issue of ancestral lands. And so it's a big discussion. We're not done with it. I'm going to try to get one member of the NDC to come on and for us to have a discussion from the perspective of the NDC or members of the NDC. Quite a big story there. Good evening. Good evening, Colette. And Colette is joining us from Pennsylvania, one of the ground zeros, if you will, of the midterm elections in the United States. Hotbed there in Pennsylvania. Good evening. Good evening, Donna Liverpool, who I know is coming to us from French Guyana. I assume Cayenne or thereabout. Welcome to you all. Welcome to you all on this beautiful October evening. October, of course, is National Calypso History Month. For those of you who love the Calypso, the mother music of our Caribbean, this month has been dedicated at Calypso History Month. I know in England, it's Black History Month, I think, Black History Month. October is a month that is pregnant with history. It was in October in 1953 that the British sent troops into Guyana to overthrow the elected government, which had been in office after 133 days. And that was quite a big development, which continues to have repercussions for our country. Here we are almost 70 years later, 69 years later, that decision by the British government to send troops into its own colony, ostensibly to turn back what it deemed to be a communist government. Of course, it was in the era of the Cold War. The competition, the race, the political competition between the then Soviet Union and the United States. Of course, 1953, Guyana was not the only victim of Cold War machinations. Jacob Arbenz of Guatemala was elected to office, and the United States, of course, sent troops into Guatemala to depose Jacob Arbenz. His sin was that he nationalized the United Fruit Company, which was a company owned by nationals of the United States. And Arbenz was overthrown. And in Iran, Prime Minister Mossadegh had also come to power. He was also left-wing, just as Arbenz was left-wing. And the PPP of Jagan, Burnham, Guyana, Ashton Chase, etc., was left-wing. In Iran, Prime Minister Mossadegh was also overthrown. And oil was involved there. And he was replaced by the Shah of Iran. And those of you who are old-timers will know the Shah was deposed in 1979. But the year 1954, 53, 54, those years were pivotal years for Guyana, Iran, and Guatemala. 1953 also was the Moncada attack by Fidel Castro and others trying to get rid of the Cuban government of that time. They were, of course, caught and sent to prison. Castro and others were sent to prison. They were eventually released, and they reorganized themselves in Mexico, and they left Mexico and went back to Cuba, and their second attempt was successful, leading to the Cuban Revolution in 1959. So this October is really pregnant with a lot of history. And if you go further back, the Red October, it was the time of the Russian Revolution of 1917. October is quite fun. Welcome to Politics 101. David Hines here. I'm going to be joined in a minute by Rickford Burke, and we're going to be talking about his persecution and attempted prosecution by the government that we have dubbed on this program nothing short of harassment. Harassment of an outspoken critic of the government. We have known that governments have had very long arms when it comes to dissidents. Of course, we never thought it would come to our Guyana. We know that Leon Trotsky, for example, was murdered in 1940 in Mexico. Trotsky was one of the major leaders of the Soviet Revolution. After Lenin died, there was a competition between himself and Stalin for leadership of the Communist Party. Stalin, of course, won out, and Trotsky went into exile, eventually ended up in Mexico. And in 1940, agents of the Soviet Union government went there and murdered him. And we have known about stories of journalists. Recently, we had a Saudi Arabian story. We are hearing of journalists, Ukrainian journalists, who are on the run. And governments, as we know, use these long arms to go after people outside of their jurisdiction. Is the Guyana government moving in that direction? Is the Guyana government moving in that direction? Going after dissidents who do not live in the jurisdiction. It's okay. They go after people inside of the jurisdiction. But now they're adding this international component to it. We are living in dangerous times. We are living in dangerous times. Welcome to Politics 101. Those of you who are joining us steadily, you are joining us. We come tonight with the news that the CCJ has thrown out the opposition election petition. The petition that was served late and that the High Court had thrown out, and that was appealed to our appeal court. Our appeal court had to first decide whether it had jurisdiction. It said it had jurisdiction, and the matter was taken to the CCJ, and the CCJ says that the appeal court does not have jurisdiction. This is the second time on this election matter that the CCJ has overturned a decision by our appeal court and has relieved the appeal court of jurisdiction on a very important matter. Where do I stand on this issue? Technicality, I think, is not the only means by which a matter should be thrown out of court. The letter of the law, of course, said that if you serve late, the matter could be thrown out. But my argument is that this is an important matter. This matter is about the legitimacy of a government. This is a matter that could overturn an election and therefore overturn a government. This is perhaps one of the most important matters that could come up in any country. And to throw such a matter on a technicality, I think goes against the spirit of the law. And so therefore, I disagree with the ruling of the Apex Court. I disagree with the ruling of the CCJ. Because I think, and I continue to say, that our courts in the Caribbean have continued this tradition of conservatism when it comes to election. Law is not just letter. Law is spirit. I said this morning, and I'm saying it again. This decision by the court could have serious implications for the stability of our country. It could have serious implications for the future of fair elections in Guyana. And the court should have taken into consideration the spirit of the law. I heard one of the justices commenting on Nandalal's decision to pause the decision before the court announced it. And that justice was speaking to the spirit of the law. There's nothing stopping Nandalal. You can't charge him for any crime. But the spirit of our jurisprudence demands that Nandalal should not post that decision. The court can invoke the spirit of the jurisprudence in sanctioning and roasting Nandalal, why it could not invoke the spirit of the law when it came to the substantive matter. The court here, I think, has erred again on the side of conservatism. And the conservative ruling of the court could have political, racial implications for Guyana. Thurgood Marshall, the first Black Supreme Court justice in the United States, and one of my heroes, referred to a constitution as a living document. And he saw himself, his role on the court, not to contract rights, but to expand rights. And this court, in the impact of its decision, could lead to a contraction of rights in Guyana, denying the opposition, denying one side in a disputed election their day in court. That's the consequence of this decision. Yes, they made a mistake by late service, but the court could remedy that. And the court decided on a technicality to deny one side of a disputed election their day in court. Their day in court. That is hardly justice. I don't question the integrity of the court. I don't impose upon the court partisanship. But I think the court is a legal instrument. But it's a legal instrument that must take into consideration the sociological environment in which it is operating. The court, the Supreme Court in the United States, led by Earl Warren in 1954, stepped outside of the letter of the law and spoke to the spirit of the law and the role of the law in social cohesion in its decision in Brown versus Board of Education. If it were left to the technicality of the law, there would have been no Brown decision. I disagree vehemently with the CCJ. I disagree vehemently with the CCJ. It has set, that ruling has the potential of setting Guyana back decades. Good evening. Welcome to Politics 101. Good evening. Good evening. Let's hear your views on this decision by our apex court. My guest tonight is Rickford Burke. Brother Rickford.
Good night, doctor. Good night to you and your listeners. Thank you for having me.
What do you make of the decision by the Supreme Court, the apex court, the CCJ?
Well, Dr. Hines, I'm not surprised. I think the CCJ has ideologically been opposed to the politics of the APNU. And I think they've developed a bias towards the government on election matters in Guyana. I think they're intolerant of the opposition. I've listened keenly to how they handle the attorneys. You would recall that the president of the court came to Guyana and met with the president and met with the attorney general, even though both of those individuals were technically parties to this matter. We spoke out against it and thought that it was inappropriate. I noticed that he has not been involved in these matters. Prior to his visit to Guyana, he was. So I guess because of the outrage, he recused himself from this matter. But I think I could be wrong on that, but I noticed that he has not been involved in this election matter. I think that the majority of the justices on the court are ideologically opposed to half of the population of Guyana and the politics of the opposition. I think I agree with you that the court has denied the opposition its day in court to test the legality of the election. They ruled that on certain matters, including matters of late service of a party to an election petition, the Court of Appeal doesn't have jurisdiction to hear the matter. I think it's a fundamentally flawed decision. How can you leave such an important decision about the future of a country in the hands of one judge? One judge. And I look forward to another case before the court of a similar nature when there might be a different decision. I think this decision is only particular to Guyana. How can the court rule that an election petition decision by one judge is not appealable? It's unheard of in any jurisprudence. And it is not that it is definitive that the petition was served late. What the attorneys argued is that the wrong date was placed on the petition. And so the court did not ventilate these issues on an appellate level. This is just this Chief Justice's decision, and that's final. What are we doing with the judiciary of the country? I'm weary of the CCJ and whether or not the CCJ is beneficial to true justice in Guyana. If I were to run a government in Guyana, I would remove the country from the CCJ because I feel very uncomfortable. Even though the court is the apex judges, the apex court, the judges are foreign. And the part of the Constitution made it very clear that on decisions about the presidency of the country, the matter should rest with the Court of Appeal. And on every occasion, the CCJ they're actively undermining that authority of the Court of Appeal. And I think with the assistance of the PPP. And so what the PPP is doing, we saw Darmlal attacking the justices of the Court of Appeal. The PPP don't like the justices of the Court of Appeal because they have not ruled in their favor and because of their ethnicity, I suppose. And so they are going to the CCJ to undermine everything these justices do. And it's going to come back to hurt the country because what the CCJ is doing is grabbing up territory for itself when the Constitution doesn't give it that power, and it is diluting the Constitution and undermining the Court of Appeal, and the PPP is happy about that. You noticed that anticipating a ruling when before this case came out, the Attorney General said they want to pass a law increasing the number of justices on the Court of Appeal. It's a clear political message that we want to have our people on the Court of Appeal because we don't like these justices because they're ruling against us and they're ruling in favor of the law and the Constitution. And we don't want those types of judges. We want judges that would rule with us politically so that we could carry out our political agenda. And that's dangerous for the country.
Rickford, Burke there, and I've left this message by Marcel Erskine on the screen because, first of all, Marcel accuses me of fear-mongering. That's fine. But he goes on to say it could have serious consequences. Marcel, do I have that much influence in Guyana? According to you all, if I run for the presidency, I won't get 2 votes. So how my fear-mongering could have serious consequences? All you decide, man. Decide whether people like Rickford and myself that influence or we don't have any influence. You can't want to struck in and blow whistle at the same time. One. Second, Marcel, you should direct your comment to the court, the CCJ. You should tell them that one of the outcome of their very conservative decision could have consequences for Guyana. It's not me, you should tell that. Tell that to the court. That's what I am trying to say. Mr. Erskine, you're not a stupid man. You're a very sensible guy. And you know that on a matter as sensitive as election, the court should have bent over backwards to accommodate fairness and justice. That is what is at stake here. I am not saying that late service is in order. I am saying yes. I can see the court flagging people for late service. But given the importance of the matter, given the gravity of the matter, given the fact that you said it could have serious consequences, the court ought to have been much broader in terms of the scope it gave itself to make a decision. Rickford makes an important point. The way, if the CCJ continues to rule in this matter, our Court of Appeal could be erased out of the jurisprudence when it comes to electoral matters. That is a serious development because our Constitution gives our Court of Appeal the final say on certain electoral matters. Secondly, the law says that the Chief Justice has the last say on a decision after the petition is heard. After the petition is heard and the Chief Justice rules, it stops there. This is not an issue where the petition is heard. So the Chief Justice is not the final arbiter. The CCJ got that wrong. The Chief Justice is the final arbiter after the petition is heard. And she says elections were free or elections were not free, final, and go to the Court of Appeal with that. But this is not a decision on the matter. This is a decision on procedure. And let me take back the she because I'm not talking here to the person of the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice does not have the last say on procedure. I think the CCJ got that wrong. So Marcel, it's not me you got to, I'm trying to do damage control here. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say the CCJ is
But Dr. Hines,
the impact of the CCJ's decision could have a nasty effect on our country. So you got to go talk to the CCJ. Yes, Rickford.
but let me speak to that, Dr. Hines. What is emerging in Guyana is a situation where supporters of the government feel that they alone have a right to speak. And it's a dangerous development. And you see the police force trying to enforce that. You see the government trying to enforce it. The government is so biased and they don't care. And the international community is allowing them to get away with it, where they want to have a one-party state, where they want to have a one political philosophy state, where nobody else must speak. Them alone must call us niggers. Them alone must be able to insult us. Them alone must threaten our lives. And we must not speak. We must not respond. We mustn't do anything because we are slaves. We're second-class citizens. That's what is emerging in Guyana. And the ABC countries encourage it. They're complicit with it. The international community is complicit with it. Nowhere in the world is freedom of speech more threatened in what we call the democratic world than in Guyana. And we're on par with places now like Russia and China and Iran. And to some extent, you have autocratic governments in Cuba and Venezuela. That's where we are. But the international community, they put this government in place and they're running with them, ride or die. The American ambassador, the Canadian ambassador, and all the other ABC ambassadors, the European ambassador, they're running with them. Even though they're committing atrocities, they're committing transnational repression crimes, they're trampling on freedom of speech, they're trampling on the rule of law. But yes, we want this government in power. And I think it's a cultural thing and a philosophical thing where they don't see a certain segment of the population of Guyana as equals. And so they're going along with it because they don't want the AP and UFC government back in power. I'm talking about the international community. And we have to change that. We have to change the fact that there must be equality. Marcel Erskine does not believe in equality because he believed that they're superior and their speech is superior and more important. And we mustn't say anything because if we expose racism, if we expose PPP hate speech, then we are inciting racial hostility. We mustn't speak, we mustn't condemn racism, we mustn't do anything, we mustn't talk about corruption because we're superior human beings. And what we are doing in this country is right. And everything you guys say is wrong and you must be subject to us. I reject that completely.
Rickford, Burke, this evening we are discussing the decision by the CCJ to throw out the appeal by, to uphold the appeal by the PPP, and in effect throwing out the petition that was already thrown out by the Chief Justice. The appeal court said it had jurisdiction. The appeal court did not even get to hear the case. The CCJ has thrown out and said the CCJ has no jurisdiction.
Mind you, Dr. Hines, the appeals court decision was unanimous.
Yeah.
It was unanimous. I think that's significant. And for the Court of Appeal, on such a flimsy issue, to overturn a unanimous decision of the Court of Appeal, to me, the majority of the justices on the Caribbean Court of Appeal are acting, the Caribbean Court of Justice are acting in concert with the PPP government to undermine the Guyana Court of Appeal.
Rickford Burke giving his opinion, and I have said that I think the effect of the ruling could have serious problems for the legal architecture in Guyana, because you're asking, what is the role, therefore, of our appeal court? If the ruling of the Chief Justice and the appeal court overturning that ruling, that could be so summarily, in my mind, summarily thrown out without any due regard for the sociological and political implications for Guyana. Guyana is not a normal society. It's not Barbados. It's not a homogeneous society. It's not Jamaica. This is a society with deep fissures. deep, deep divide. This is a society that has to be handled with care. And it seems as though the CCJ, in these conservative rulings, they are not willing to go beyond the letter of the law. They only go beyond the letter of the law in matters that favor the government. And so, although I am not there yet, I can understand supporters of the opposition saying that the CCJ favors the government. You know, when it came to taking jurisdiction, the CCJ goes beyond the letter. When it comes to ruling on a separate matter, it stays within the letter of the law.
And not only that, Dr.
There's
Hanks,
no
it's continuously changing the Constitution. The CCJ is continuously changing the Guyana Constitution. And I cannot understand how on earth an apex court could say the last word of any legal matter that is in arbitration before the court ends at the first level. I mean, that's what the CCJ just ruled, that in petition matters, unless, and they carve out a very special exception, right? The matter ends at the Court of Appeal because in their view, the Constitution gives the court exclusive jurisdiction. But then why do we have a Court of Appeal? I think the Constitution does give the court exclusive jurisdiction to hear the matter. But if somebody does not agree with the petition, then the court should allow the matter to progress up the legal system. That's why we have a democracy. That's why we have a rule of law. And if this Court of Appeal is telling us that with regard to election petitions, where the course of the country is determined, where governance of the country is determined, we have foreign judges telling us it begins and ends with one judge. That is, to me, an affront to the rule of law. And I would like to see how they rule on another country.
Coffee makes an important point here. This is why the other Caribbean countries, Antigua, Grenada, St. Vincent, they're all Jamaica, they're all skeptical of the CCJ.
Trinidad and Tobago.
For this very reason, that they fear that this court would become an overpowering level of jurisdiction over the local jurisdiction. And this thing is playing out before their very eyes.
Yeah.
And Kofi's asking, do we need a referendum in Guyana?
We do.
The CCJ. I am not there yet. I'm a Caribbeanist. I'm a regionalist. And I say that every day. I rather see, hold on, Rickford, I'd rather the CCJ than the Privy Council. I am a Caribbean man. I'm a regional integrator. I want to say that. But I also am very sensitive to how regional institutions could destroy trust within member countries. And so therefore, for me, this is, I'm not taking a knee-jerk position, but I'm saying this matter could have serious repercussions for our country, Guyana. And it could have serious repercussions for the future of the CCJ itself. The future of the CCJ itself. And so, Kofi is showing also, look, I study I have to teach the Federation of 58 to 62. And I was against, I was a child then, so I could not think, but when I came of age, I was against Jamaica calling a referendum, which effectively broke up the Federation. And we are now not a Caribbean nation because of that decision. And Dr. Williams said 1 from 10 left nothing. And I am pained to this day about that development. And this CCJ should not take us back to 58-62. It should be a forward-looking court. And it has to take into consideration that the Caribbean is not a monolith. The Caribbean, is made up of subcultures for all intents and purposes. There is a Caribbeanness, but there is a sub-Caribbeanness in our various states. Dr. Gonzalez refers to the islandness of our Caribbean nationalism. And it seems as though the CCJ is not sensitive enough. Oh, it could have done better in this case. The CCJ could have done better in this case. I am not questioning their integrity. I'm not questioning their intent. What I'm saying is the effect, the impact of your decision could have a more negative than positive impact on political, social, and racial relations in Guyana. The end product of your decision, and I'm repeating it here, the end product of your decision is to deny one side in a dispute as political, ethnic, economic consequences, deny them their day in court. That's what the ultimate decision is. Listen, history is not going to be kind to the CCJ on this decision. Rickford, let's move on.
I want to make a quick point on two issues. One, I think CARICOM is very indifferent to the unique situation in Guyana. They treat Guyana like if it's just a monolithic society like the rest of the Caribbean. They're not concerned with the race issue, with the corruption issue, with how the government approaches and discriminates against segments of the population. That's one. And the CCJ has the same problem. Now, I am not necessarily against CCJ. I agree with Coffee that maybe we need to have a referendum, or the government and the opposition have to agree to exclude election matters from the jurisdiction of the CCJ. And that is the intent of the framers of the Constitution, because the Constitution says with regard to determining the question about who is eligible for the presidency, that matter ends at the Court of Appeal. But the CCJ, in the election matters in 2020, overturned the Court of Appeal, claiming they don't have jurisdiction to make that determination. So it gave itself that jurisdiction. And like you said, that's why even Trinidad, where the court is based, does not recognize the appellate jurisdiction of the court, because Trinidadians don't want the court determining who their government is. And all of the other Caribbean countries are weary of them trying to grab power from themselves, take away powers from the parliament and give it to themselves so that they could make major decisions for the country. The courts aren't supposed to make policy decisions. They're supposed to advocate on the law. And the CCJ is making policy decisions for the people of Guyana. So I just wanted to make that point. Maybe we can exclude election matters. We need to amend the Constitution to take away elections.
I don't think they're making policy. I think the impact of their rulings
Same difference.
Policy. I mean,
Same
the court in the United States overthrew Roe versus Wade.
That's a policy decision.
The impact of that, it has policy impact, you're right. So, but like I said, I am being very careful here. I am not questioning the integrity of the court.
I'm not doing it either.
I am questioning the integrity of their decision making. I just want to make a distinction, because at the end of the day, institutions matter. And we can disagree with institutions, but we have to balance it, that we don't want to undermine institutions. You know, we want to disagree with institutions.
That is true, because the court can become very valuable if the government decides to change the composition of the Court of Appeal. But we should take away certain matters from them, especially when it comes to determining the government. We cannot allow foreign judges to determine who our governments are. That's just my view.
I don't know that they're foreign. They may be foreigners, but the court is not a foreign court.
The court is not foreign, but the judges are foreign. The court is our apex court, but the people sitting on them are foreigners to Guyana.
Yeah, but if you accept if you accept integration, you have to accept some foreignness. That's why I don't refer to the Caribbean as a diaspora. I refer to the Caribbean as family, right? Because we are family, right? But anyhow, I get your point. Refer the government has continued to go after you. The latest incident, I think we are familiar with. But for the purposes of our audience, walk us through what happened in this recent saga, because that is what it is, I think, a saga. Go ahead.
Well, what happened is, as I've been saying, a woman reached out to me on Facebook, and she complained of being ripped off by BM Suit dealership. When she sent me the first message, I saw it, but I ignored it. And then she sent me a message again, and somebody on my team responded to her, because I have several people who are administrators for my page, and I'm pretty sure you do as well. And then she sent it again, and I noticed it, and I responded to her. And I said, could you send us some documentation about this issue you're talking about? And then she sent a short letter with some letter she got saying that her car was repossessed and all of that. And when I started to engage her, her complaint was that she had signed, a family member bought a car from BM Suit, and that family member, she signed as a guarantor, but she had also purchased a car from that dealership. And when they went and the person missed a payment, that's the claim here. The person missed the payment. And once the person missed the payment, they went to the person's house in their yard, onto their property, and took the car away. Not only did they take the car that the relative bought, they took her car as well. That's the allegation. So they took the guarantor's car. They seized 2 cars because she signed as the guarantor. Dr. Hines, that sounds fundamentally fair to me. In this country, the dealership would have been prosecuted for predatory practices. And so I asked her to send me more evidence. Not only did she send me more documents, but she sent me 3 other people who had the same problem. And then a young man contacted me and said he called the dealership. He bought a car from them. He called the dealership. He works on the oil rig. And he was in hospital, just undergone surgery. And when he called them and told them he couldn't make the payment that month, he will do that until he came out from hospital, they sent and took the car. They repossessed the car. And then he said to me, because he made that comment on Facebook, they tracked him down, called him, and threatened him that if he did not remove that post from my page, they would sue him and they'll take the car, and he wouldn't get the car back. So also Darwin Bess, who's a businessman in Guyana, contacted me, a black businessman, and said, I bought a Range Rover from these people and I never got the title. And then they owe me $170 million. So I went and I made a post, or sorry, it was just after that post that Darwin contacted me. But I made a post saying, VM Sold, all these customers are accusing you of fraudulent transactions, predatory practices, words to that effect. You should correct this. James Bond called me and said the owners for the company called him. And by the way, Dr. Hines, over 700 people came on my page and made similar complaints that they experience this kind of predatory practice. And so James Bond called me and said, the owner wanted to talk to you, and because he wants to address these complaints. I said, okay, fine. And the owner called me. From the time I did my research and I found out who these people are. And so once James told me that the owner wanted to talk to me, I decided that if they called me, I'll tape everything. And that's what I did. I taped every single conversation with them. And I've made some of them public. And when he called me, he said he wants to solve these problems. All of them that people are talking about on my page are not through. And if I can go back on my page and change the post and say, everybody who wants this problem solved, contact me and I will send their information to them. I declined to do that. I said, I'm willing to change the post because my aim is not to damage your company. My aim is for people to be treated fairly. So I will make a post saying they should contact you and you will solve the problem. And he did that. In the meantime, about 12 people or 15 people inboxed me, supporting documents, showing me what happened to them. He asked me if I can send them to him. I sent them to him. He contacted the people. A few of them did call back and say, my problem was solved. For instance, the young man got back his car. They made an arrangement. The other woman got back her vehicle. There were some other issues that weren't his dealership. And he was messaging me on Messenger, on WhatsApp, back and forth, telling me, I'm solving these problems, this is what's happening, whatever it is. So I raised with him in the conversation when he called me, the fact that Darwin Best had said that they had owed him $170 million. He said that he was aware of it. It was his brother who had the transaction with Mr. Best, and that the family had been urging him to solve the matter with Darwin Best. He said he's going to give his brother my number and the brother will contact me. James Bond the following day called me with the brother on the phone, and he attempted to explain to me what was the problem. I said, listen, all of you guys need to get in a room with your lawyers and try to solve this problem, because it is looking bad that so many complaints are on social media about this company. He asked me if, seeing that Darwin spoke to me, if I can help him with James Bond solve the problem. I said, okay, fine, y'all get in the room with your lawyer and y'all talk. After about a week, back and forth, they're complaining, Best is complaining. James Bond called me and said, I think we have a framework agreement where they had paid some of Best's money allegedly to somebody else who is one of his associates. And they said, okay, we will pay him X amount of dollars and we will recover the money from the associate that we allegedly paid, and we will give it to him, but all couldn't happen at one time. I said, put that in agreement, sign an agreement to that effect. It ends the hostilities and the parties can be satisfied that they're working towards a resolution. And that was it. The next thing I heard is that they drafted an agreement based on my suggestion. It was sent to James Bond. James Bond sent it to their company attorney, and I never heard anything else after. I got a wink somewhere from a police officer saying that my name is trying to frame me. I said, okay, send me details. And the person who contacted me sent me some details. I messaged James Bond and I messaged back this businessman, Afraz Mohammed, and I asked him, what is this about? That I'm hearing something about a cybercrime complaint. Nobody responded. Then I started seeing the first statement came from the Attorney General's office saying that I was trying to extort these Indian business people for $90 million. That same post from the Attorney General claimed that two reporters said that they had written and posted a story on GNN, Guyana News Network, of which I'm a contributor, saying that this man evades taxes. And then later on, the Attorney General's post said it moved from $90 million to the fact that these people are trying to get, these reporters are trying to get allegedly $1 million from the businessman to remove this post, so-called post from GNN. Of course, I was totally unaware of what they were talking about, so I didn't pay much attention until I saw the police issue the statement saying the reporters said that they wrote this. Well, I went and I challenged what the Attorney General said. I said, why are you calling my name if your story is saying these reporters wrote the story and posted it, and there's nothing wrong with posting a story, and GNN is a New York, a United States network. I'm sure that they would have checked their story before they posted it. And so I challenged what the Attorney General said. The following day, they changed the story. And they said, oh, no, the reporters wrote the story and gave it to me and I posted it. Well, of course, that's nonsense because I live in America. These reporters lived in Guyana. And then next thing you know, I saw this wanted bulletin for Darwin Best and a wanted bulletin for me. The joke about it is that they said that we tried to extort the businessman. And of course, nobody tried to extort him. Why didn't they charge James Bond as well? They didn't even, I spoke to James Bond. They did not even interview James Bond. What it is that they heard it, the police heard that I was involved in trying to, at least they reached out to me, and I had ventilated all of these complaints on my page. The businessman was upset. They are in bed with the police, and they decided that they tried to frame me. And let me state this finally, Dr. Hines. Throughout the entire process, we had good police officers telling us what they were planning. And that's why we were one step ahead of them all the time. Not only did the police officers communicate with me, we allowed those contacts to communicate directly with members, with elected officials in this country, and law enforcement officials in this country. So even before the Guyana Police Force put out that wanted bulletin, elected officials in this country, people from the Justice Department, knew what the Guyana Police Force was planning.
Rickford Burke there telling us his side of the story, walking us through the steps. It seems that you were being a peacemaker and some or the other the story get out of hand. Rickford, where are things now?
Well, first of all, Dr. Hines, let me say this, and I want to make this very clear to people in the diaspora. Members of the Guyana Police Force and the Guyana government are involved in transnational repression. Transnational repression is when they harass, attack, threaten dissidents or persons abroad who speak out against governments back home in the country where these people are from, in this case, Guyana. The Guyana Police Force has absolutely no jurisdiction over anything I do or anyone else that don't live in Guyana. That's the first thing. We want to make it very clear. What they did is, I understand that they shopped around with people from the Attorney General's office and the DPP's office to find a crime that they believe can target me outside of Guyana's jurisdiction. And that's why they came up with this conspiracy under Chapter 801 of the criminal laws of Guyana. But that very law says that if someone allegedly commits a crime inside of Guyana and another person commits the crime outside of Guyana, they can only pursue the person in Guyana. And of course, that's why, because I didn't commit any crime. Of course, I'm not a criminal. Everybody knows me. I'm not involved in those kinds of nonsense. But since they want to talk about laws, everybody knows in criminal procedure that you have to prosecute somebody in a jurisdiction where a crime is committed. If I live in New York, how can the Guyana Police Force put out a wanted bulletin for me for a crime they claim that I committed in New York? I live in New York. And even if I posted a story, and I did not, and there's nothing wrong with the story, because I've read the statement by GNN saying the story was based on a letter from Mr. Best's attorney accusing the man of changing an invoice of the fuel to defraud GRA on the value of the fuel to pay less taxes. Then there's a voice note that GNN released where the man himself is admitting he doesn't pay duties on these vehicles. And also they said they confirmed certain things with the GRA. So even to the story, even if I posted that story, the story is not defamation, because defamation has to be false. So I'm not sure how can they claim somebody defamed this businessman and his business if the story is true and he's admitting to it on tape. But the main thing is that they are trying to use the cybercrime legislation to silence and suppress views and to suppress criticism by people living out of the country, outside of the country. And the cybercrime legislation doesn't have any extraterritorial jurisdiction. They can't assume jurisdiction in the United States over Guyana's cybercrime legislation. That's number one. Number two, the legislation requires that they find a computer system in the country. So everything that they did here is wrong. They are not concerned about that. They just want to target me. They want to commit crimes of transnational repression because they want to smear me, assassinate my character, and intimidate me and silence me. None of that will happen. As a matter of fact, we have asked the United States government to sanction the police commissioner, sanction the crime chief, sanction the head of the major crimes unit. And we have a forum coming up on October 30th, a public forum with our members of Congress, with members of the Justice Department, with the FBI, discussing the Guyanese community, what the Guyanese community can do to protect themselves from these levels of transnational repression crimes, as well as protect themselves from death threats. If you notice, they put out critics to be their Solicitor General and their constitutional scholar to talk about how I should be extradited. And then he called out my number. He had people send me death threats. The New York City Police Department had to be at my house because of those death threats. That's a serious, serious crime. And they're threatening other people in the diaspora. So we're at a level now where the relationship between Guyana and the United States will have to change, where they're targeting United States citizens, they're sending death threats. There's still a death threat investigation against the Attorney General who came to this country and allegedly advocated for me to be killed. That matter is still open. All of these matters will be addressed on October 30th when we have a big forum with our elected officials, the Justice Department, and the FBI telling us how to handle these matters and protect ourselves.
Rickford Burke, their political activist and very vocal opponent of the injustices that the government of Guyana are accused of.
And Dr. Hines, let me add this. Not one person made any allegation against me. Not one. We have the file. I want to say that. We have the statements by these witnesses. Not one person implicated me in anything, of course, because they didn't know me. These witnesses said they don't know me. One person said they believe I am associated with GNN, and that's the basis for the government pursuing me. And I'm not only saying that, we have evidence of a criminal conspiracy by the Guyana Police Force to target me. We have evidence. That evidence is with the State Department and the Justice Department and our members of Congress. And we'll see where it goes.
We'll see where it goes. Rickford Burke there weighing in on the recent attempt by the government to continue their long attempt to prosecute him. That kind of behavior by the government amounts, as far as I'm concerned, to harassment. And we have to, of course, keep pushing back against.
And Dr. Hines, you said it's harassment. Indeed, it's harassment, and it's against the United States law. There's a law called anti-transnational crimes legislation, and it forbids countries like Guyana from harassing, targeting, and everything the government is doing. It's a textbook offense under that law. And we'll hear what the Justice Department is saying, because our elected officials are actively involved in this. And like I said, they will be making some announcements on October 30th at a public forum where they will address the Guyanese community in the tri-state area.
Rickford Burke, my brother, thank you so much for coming on tonight and shedding some light, contributing to the discussion on this recent decision by the Caribbean Court of Justice. Some interesting points made by you. Our audience has kept up with our discussion. They're obviously satisfied with the kind of vibrations that came from you tonight. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Good night, everybody.
101. And to you, my good audience, good evening, good night. Thanks for coming out. We have reached the point in Guyana where we have to expand our resistance. There clearly is need for a movement that is outside of the political parties, a movement to deal with these issues of inequality. That is a big issue in Guyana. I think at the bottom of all our woes is the issue of inequality, social inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality, political inequality. That's at the center of our woes. And we have to fight on various fronts. So I'm putting out the idea tonight about a movement that operates outside of the political parties. I think political parties have their work to do. I belong to one of them. But political parties have to operate within the context of elections and so forth. And there's a limit to which political parties can go and perhaps should go. And so we have to have a movement to ensure that the value of equality is maintained in our country. As I said, it's not just racial equality, but it's gender equality. It's social equality. It's political equality. Without equality, there will be no equitability. And without equitability, there'll be no justice. We've got work to do. Good night. And I'll see you all tomorrow when we continue our discussion on where Guyana is. I'm sure you have not heard the last of the impact of that ruling today. That ruling today by the CCJ. We've got work to do.